Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 150 of The Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. This week, we are bringing you part 2 of our epic interview with Paul Sheldon. Now, if you didn't catch part 1 of the interview, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to episode 148, where we began this fascinating dialogue with Paul Sheldon. Paul does an amazing job of introducing himself back on episode 148. I won't do that introduction justice, so I, again, really encourage you to go back and listen to these in a chronological order. But suffice to say, Paul is a collaborative fundraising development consultant who is dedicated to long-term sustainability, equity, and altruistic creativity. His specialties include fundraising, organizational management, staff development, principles of sustainable management, implementing sustainability in business, capital acquisition, board development, and realizing dreams. In fact, when we left off part 1 of this interview, Paul and I had just begun a fascinating conversation around the topic of lucid dreaming, and I was about to connect the dots between that topic and another topic near and dear to my heart, that of desistance from crime. And that's where part 1 ended off. So what I'm going to do is tee this episode up with the final question that I was asking Paul during part 1 of this interview, and then we will hit the ground running with his response to that question and all the other amazing things Paul and I cover in part 2 of this interview. So sit back, relax, and enjoy part 2 of my conversation with Paul Sheldon. And I will see you all on the other side. Yeah. But as you said, one of the steps indeed is recognizing when you're in a dream or not. So at least the literature I read, they coached us on just pausing during the day to question, again, am I in a dream now? And they said sort of tricks of the trade are you lose the level of detail in dreams that you have in real life. So for example, if you were to right now look at your clock or look at your watch and you can read the time, you're not dreaming, because in a dream, you wouldn't have that detail. So things of that nature. So you've inspired me, Paul. I've got to get back into lucid dreaming. But the bigger tie-in, or the bigger question rather, when you were talking, and regular listeners of the podcast will know we often talk about themes around desistance from crime, and listeners will recognize those variables around hope and belief and agency and self-efficacy. And I know there's a lot of work in the desistance camps around, okay, how can we operationalize this research? And I know, for example, when I've worked with Dr. Ralph Sarin up in Ottawa, he does exercises with folks where the encouragement is really to visualize your future crime-free self. What does that look like? You know, write a song or write a poem or tell a story visualizing that future crime-free life you have. And now as you speak, Paul, I'm wondering, well, we could tie dreaming into that. Like you said, not just dreaming to have the fantasies of riding a dragon like I do or whatever, but yeah, manifest your future. Start dreaming about that future crime-free self. Do you see perhaps, again, links to those desistance themes about how folks eventually desist from crime based on how they see their future pathways?
Absolutely. And we have some testimonials from people who've been through the wisdom of dreaming process who talk about that. And Dreamosophy is designed to work in concert with other programs. So one of the things that Gary Moore, when he was in Ohio, used to talk about is the three aspects of what it takes to reduce recidivism. And the first is job readiness, which includes literacy. And the second is faith-based programs. And the third is environmental responsibility and the whole green jobs training emphasis that he did. And that the world of faith-based programs and job readiness and literacy and environmental responsibility, they all blend together in what I call confluence. And so Dreamosophy is intended to complement other programs. We're not a job training program. We're not a faith-based worship opportunity. We're not a literacy course. We're designed to help people deepen their relationship with their own dream lives. And we have found that almost all people, and I try not to speak in absolutes, but almost all people have an innate urge to health. They want to be healthy. They want to be good spouses. They want to be good parents to their children. They want to be good children to their parents. They want to be contributing members of the culture. And they get pushed into criminality by circumstances beyond their control, usually out of desperation, sometimes out of peer group pressure and wanting to be somebody and that sort of thing. But one of the programs we offer at Dreamosophy is called Untangling Relationships. We're doing this in several institutions in Ohio and Kentucky and Missouri. That's all about, okay, I'm an individual, and okay, I'm in many ways alone, and in many ways I'm helpless to deal with my sense of being a human who's alone. But I have relationships, and I can take responsibility for my own attitude, my own participation. We do another program that's called Who Are You? That was developed by Dwayne Hendricks, who was the warden. He's been in a lot of different roles, but he was the warden of the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon. And during his journey as a warden with the Bureau of Prisons, he developed this program, Who Are You?, that's part of his New Daylight Foundation. And we're offering that in some correctional institutions also to help, and particularly with formerly incarcerated people, to help them answer that question, who are you? And do you have a creed? Do you have an inner understanding? Do you know what your values are and what your beliefs are? And are you ready to engage in inner dialogue with the voices that might steer you wrong based on your past? And can you draw from your dream for the future to talk yourself into a better life? And it's not just talking, it's cognitive behavioral process to help people get to a better way. And Dr. Hendricks offers his program through another group that I got involved with about the same time as the Green Prisons work started, which is Planting Justice out in Oakland, California. And I don't know if we have time to talk about that today, but it's a wonderful example of an organization that's outside the walls, but that bridges the walls and works inside and outside to create employment for formerly incarcerated people once they get out and to create meaning and purpose.
When you were talking about the Who Are You program, Paul, it reminded me, again, I'm going to go back to my desistance, my passion for desistance from crime. We know that a lot of that process involves what's referred to as identity transformation, if you will, essentially getting that individual to change how they think of themselves as shot caller, gangster, hustler, pimp, thug, bad guy, whatever, to husband, father, valued employee, citizen. And we know, I know I've talked to Dr. Shad Maruna, a lot of folks have, but he's done a lot of work really around the importance of linking how our identities really are linked to our behaviors. And you touched on that with the Who Are You? It's not just a matter of addressing those criminogenic factors, those risk factors. We get so much bang for the buck by but by helping that individual literally change the way they see themselves when they look in the mirror, because we know, and Dr. Maruna points to other groups that do this artfully. There's a reason I should say, others have tapped into the strength of if we change how someone identifies, we can change behaviors. And he points to entities such as, the Navy SEALs, for example. The reason they get these brave men to do these things is because they're changing their identity. They identify as, no, I'm a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
And that's why I've got my call sign, my this, my that. But he points out other entities do this too. Street gangs do this. The reason you get a 16-year-old to do a drive-by shooting is now I'm identifying as Junebug, who's a member of the Gangster Disciples, and that identity will drive my behavior. Sports teams do this, fraternities do this. So again, I see a lot of crossover here when you were talking about that "Who Are You" program.
Yeah, and that's really
we can't just look at those traditional risk factors. We have to look at helping that individual change their perception of themselves.
And that's really the essence of Dreamosophy, of the wisdom of dreaming, because they're wonderful traditions. Martin Luther King is probably the most famous among Americans for putting out the phrase, I have a dream. But John Lennon did a song, Imagine, and there are a lot more contemporary music around the theme of dreaming. And in Dreamosophy, we ask that question, who are you? And we also ask, where do you derive your sense of who you are? Are you a product of your past, or are you using your dreams for the future like a skyhook? Do you anchor your sense of self in your dream? Do you have a dream to live for that leads you into a life worth giving? And can you hold fast to that dream no matter what's going on in the circumstances, but recognize that what makes you who you are is your dream?
I get giddy, Paul, when I talk to other people who have different backgrounds, different experiences, but when we hit these common denominators, it reassures me, okay, you're doing something right.
Yes, I would say you are, Joe.
And when you've been talking about, the giving, again, from the Desistance literature, we know that this notion of generativity, of giving back, is part of that desistance process.
Yes.
It's not just not reoffending, not recidivating, total, what they refer to as that sort of tertiary desistance, acceptance back in the community, acceptance back amongst the world, basically. It involves that generativity, that giving back. So I love that expression, how you sort of wordplay that, a life worth giving. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, and that's, you talk about generativity, that's in the book, The Wisdom of Dreaming. We talk about that, about the development into a person who is generating. That you're not just your past, you're not just the stories that you've been given, but you have the opportunity to generate a life worth giving. And I know we were chatting earlier a little bit about Aaron Rodgers and his darkness retreat. Dreaming is the ultimate darkness. You go into the darkness of deep sleep where you aren't. You're not conscious, you don't exist. And then out of that darkness, you wake up into a dream. And in the dream world, you can be anything you can imagine. You can experience anything you can imagine. And then out of the dream, you wake up into waking life, whatever that is. And you have an opportunity to pull out of darkness, to pull out of nothingness, generativity. What are you generating that is worth giving, that is worth having people give you the time of day? That's worth spending time with your kids being who you are, spending time with your spouse being who you are, investing time in learning to be a better person. And the Christians called it metanoia in the early days. In English, it's been translated to repentance. Some people call it conversion. That's kind of a charged word nowadays because of conversion therapy and some things that are maybe overreaching. In Dreamosophy, we call it confluence. The confluence between your dreams for the future and the events of your waking life. Are you cultivating confluence so that you are flowing into a life that is a dream come true?
I know you just now briefly mentioned Aaron Rodgers, and although we have a worldwide audience, we're based in Minnesota, right next to the Packers. So let's double back, if you don't mind. Let's talk more about if people have read in the news, Aaron Rodgers is reflecting on his future by means of darkness therapy. Paul, I know you've got some experience here. Maybe paint a more complete picture of darkness therapy and in particular the ties to correctional reintegration.
Yeah, to me, it's a very interesting dichotomy because corrections in the good old days of dungeons and prisons, from the biblical time, from the old civilized societies, there was a border that they had around putting people on a cross or throwing them into a hole or putting them in the stocks, where imprisonment just meant solitary confinement or confinement with some very dangerous people. And it was understood that once you got locked onto that side, of course, originally it was just banishment. You got put out onto the ice or sent out into the jungle to be eaten by predators. But as cities emerged and they developed jails and dungeons, it was understood that you were thrown in there with dangerous people and that bad things were going to happen. People in corrections know about the history of corrections, William Penn and others, or even the Catholic Church and the Buddhist monastery traditions, the Zen monastery traditions, and the African tradition. There are many traditions in which incarceration is not a bad thing. It's a safety thing. You go and you get 3 meals a day, or you get bread and water, or you get a single cell where you are isolated with a sacred text, and you're given an opportunity or given training to meditate on your breath or on the meaning of life or whatever, and you come out a changed, healed person. But in corrections, we still have the idea of the hole. Somebody being thrown into a hole and a steel plate put on top of it, and there's no light and no sanitation facilities, and it's bad. And the people who go through that, even for days, let alone months or years on end, come out damaged. And folks like Dan Pacholke from the state of Washington have dedicated at least part of their career to finding a better way, to not having solitary isolation be a punishment. And now we contrast that with this movement of darkness therapy, where for thousands of years, going as far back as the pyramids of Egypt and the Greek dream cultivation temples, where people longed for darkness. They longed for the safety and the security and the quiet and the peace of being in total darkness, isolated from sounds. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid, there's one legend that says the purpose of that was to go in there and be totally isolated from the world. And the sun only shined in there once a year on the winter solstice and again on the summer solstice. And that was it. And otherwise, no light. There are Aztec and Mayan traditions that offer that, and African traditions where darkness was respected as the source. That's where we come from. And the folks in the Czech Republic have done a lot of research on that. There are several centers in the United States now that offer complete isolation. I happen to have gone to the same facility where Aaron Rodgers is going. And it is a blissful, healing experience. One of the most profound things for me of spending 5 days and 4 nights in total darkness was that it was not dangerous. It was not scary. The only risk was me. My own thoughts, my own terrors, my own self-doubt. But the darkness is immense. It's eternal. It's infinite. One person I heard coming out of darkness said it was unrelenting. Like when you stop thinking and you stop worrying and you're not doing anything and there's nothing there but darkness, it doesn't go away. It's just there. It doesn't rise or set. You don't have partial darkness and more darkness. It's dark. And so for me, that was a blissful experience because I enjoy the silence of the nothingness from which life emerges. And of course, the ancient texts all say it's easy to find enlightenment in a cave. The challenge is to be a householder and hold that nothingness within you and then generating, coming back to generativity, generate yourself as a person of compassion and kindness and service and being a positive force for good in the waking world as you come out of the darkness. Excuse me, when you wake up from the dream and you come out of the darkness into your, quote, real life, who are you? Are you the presence of love and compassion? Are you the presence of kindness and peace and support? And that's a choice. And so this darkness movement, I think, has tremendous potential. Not if done wrong. If it's done with a lock on the door against people's will, it's a terrible, damaging experience. But what if it was a choice? What if there was no lock on the door? You go in there for as long as you can stand it, and then you come out when you're ready, and there's somebody outside who's trained to help you integrate the experience of your own existential aloneness into being in relationship with people you care about in a way that nourishes them and you.
And I'm sorry, Paul, did you say this has already been implemented a little bit here in the States?
Not in corrections, but yes, there are several centers in the United States that offer dark rooms. The best ones are the caves, where they have an earth-bermed studio that has a fully functional bathroom and a sink and a spa tub and a place to sleep and a place to meditate and a common room and heat in the winter and cool in the summer. And there are people outside where if you need to come out or if somebody needs to reach you for an emergency, it's, you're not locked in the hole. It's a willing choice. And then, I know people who've done it for as long as 10 days. I've heard of some people who've done it in caves for months. But for me, what's interesting is the interface. Do you have an opportunity to go into silent darkness, to listen to the space in between the thoughts, to be quiet, and to be at one with whatever we are as human beings and whatever else there is, which for me feels conscious. The world to me feels conscious. Darkness feels conscious. It's not an anthropomorphized human consciousness, but there's a presence. Some people call it God or the divine or the universe. I call it the dream stream. But there's this darkness within which everything else occurs. You think about outer space. I think about quantum physics. The presence of a phenomenon is the exception. It's the anomaly. What's mostly present is darkness. And dark matter is not dark, it's transparent. Darkness is not dark, it's transparent. It's nothing. And that, to me, has mythological implications for who we are as human beings and how we organize our culture, coming in and out of darkness and having respect for that transition.
I could have these conversations with you all day long, Paul. I'm so glad
I hope I haven't.
I'm so glad we connected.
Too long.
You have not. Let's look at another aspect of your truly Renaissance push here. Let's talk a little bit about Planting Justice.
Yeah. So we mentioned Planting Justice. They're a delightful, sincere organization. When I first learned of them more than 10 years ago now, there were 6 people working out of the founder's house. These 2 kids in Oakland, California, who had come out of UC Berkeley, one Persian, one Mexican, Lebanese American, who wanted to do something to make the world a better place. And they were on food stamps and they had no money and they just wanted to do something worth doing. And they got this idea of converting lawns to food gardens and employing formerly incarcerated people to create permaculture food gardens. And permaculture is just a specific word that's used to refer to ways of living that are in harmony with nature that will be more permanent than the kind of modern life that we're doing that's killing life on Earth. Permaculture would be a culture that respects people and place and makes a contribution that is positive or at least neutral and not damaging to the natural world. And so they were working to convert lawns to food gardens in underserved areas of West Oakland, California. And there are a lot of people in West Oakland who don't have access to a supermarket. It's miles to the nearest market. They don't have access to fresh produce. They have a corner store that maybe has onions and bananas and a head of iceberg lettuce if you're lucky. And no real fresh food and no concept of nourishment in the community cycles and rituals. By coincidence, Dr. Dwayne Hendricks, who created the Who Are You program, was born in West Oakland. And Planting Justice has grown since the time that I first encountered them and served as their development director to $6 million a year organization with 60 employees. They have 2 nurseries and urban farms. They have 5-acre food forests that they're cultivating in the East Bay, northeast of Oakland. They're working in, I think, 4 or 5 different correctional institutions where they go into San Quentin or county jails and other programs and offer education programs about gardening and about food justice and equity and the distribution of food and how we can get better food to everyone. They're a very sincere organization. I think half of their staff is formerly incarcerated people. I'm not sure the number's that high right now. It used to be when there were fewer people. It might be 25% of their staff are formerly incarcerated, almost all people of color, who are working together to make the community a better place by teaching food justice. And one of the things I like particularly about Planting Justice is they recognize that formerly incarcerated people by default are leaders in their communities. Now, that leadership can in many cases be negative. You know, if they're into the life, if they're doing drugs and drive-by shootings and carjackings and stealing stuff and holding up convenience stores and all that stuff, they're leading in the wrong direction. But they're still leaders. When they come out, their friends, their family, their parents, their children are all looking to them to see if they've gotten better. Are we going to be relieved of the bad person who was such a problem for us that we don't even want to communicate again? And can they make a life for themselves? Are they sober? Do they have a job? Can they keep a job? Are they entrepreneurs? Have they started a business? Is their business doing well? Are they nonviolent? Have they learned to manage their anger? All these criteria that we use in the pro-social indices, they're leaders on all of those indices. Are they healthy? Do they know anything worth talking about? Can they show up for a family gathering or community gathering? And can we count on them to be there sober? That's leadership. People are watching them, and Planting Justice recognizes that, and they teach people to accept leadership as educators, as mentors, as neighbors, as members of a family. It's just a wonderful institution that, to me, they're being very prudent about not growing too fast. They've been around for 15 years now. They've grown exponentially. They have dozens of staff people and several locations and facilities, but they know that they're not ready to have a Planting Justice in every city in America. They want to make their first region work before they try to replicate. And that has a lot to do with economy and where we put our values as a society. If they're solely grant funded, then they're not going to be sustainable in other areas because it's all dependent on the grants. So they're doing things like creating an aquaponics greenhouse that will grow greens for the restaurants in Oakland that will provide positive cash flow to create 12 jobs that are self-sustaining. They're like Homeboy Industries and Crossroads and so many other programs around the country, Recycle Forests in Indianapolis, that are creating jobs, that are creating cash flow that is self-sustaining, that's entrepreneurial. You know, are they employing 10 or 20,000 people? No, not yet. But could they? Maybe. You know, what if, having been incarcerated and having a resume of the programs that people went through while they were incarcerated to make themselves a better person was a valuable credential? What if being a graduate of San Quentin State Prison or of Noble Correctional Institution in Ohio or Belmont Correctional Institution or the Medium Security Institution in St. Louis, I'm just naming the places where we do Dreamosophy programs, not San Quentin, but others. What if that was a credential? Maybe not the same as a Harvard diploma, but it was a diploma in the School of Hard Knocks that certified that people have been through the ringer They've programmed, they've learned, they've become a different kind of person, and now they're back out on the streets demonstrating how to be different. Now, and this is where Brian Cain comes in. What if we supported that so that they didn't come back out on the streets with $200 and nothing but a monthly check-in with a parole officer or probation officer? What if they came out into a set of institutions that are also profitable and designed to provide the support that people need? And the same is true of descendants of American slaves, in my opinion. I mean, we should have social institutions that support people in having functional lives, that don't discriminate against them because of their background, but recognize everybody has a background and everybody has a future, and that future can be just. It can involve justice, it can involve green values that make the world a better place and that is sustainability oriented. That's what people like Planting Justice and Brian Cain. And another program I'll mention is the Insight Garden program, which started out at San Quentin and teaches people what they call inner gardening, to cultivate being a self that bears fruit for the community, that is nourishing to the community. And they use gardens, actual gardens, where they teach people how to garden, but then they also use that as a metaphor for growing a better self.
I will coordinate with you, Paul, after this interview to get websites for as many of these programs, for example, Planting Justice, for our listeners to tap into, because you're being a awesome encyclopedia of highlighting these worthwhile movements, really.
One of my nicknames is Google, and I think my friends who call me Google are maybe going to rename me ChatGPT.
It's another topic for another show.
Yes.
I don't want to let you get out of here, Paul, without having you talk about the Laura X Institute for the Learning of Social Justice Movements.
Yeah, it's an interesting confluence that I met Laura X by coincidence almost 20 years ago. And we can tell that story at another time. But Laura is one of the creators of second wave feminism. And for those of your audience who don't know that there have been waves of feminism, the first wave was getting the vote at the turn of the 20th century and just having women treated as people, getting them to be able to own property, to enter into contracts, to not be chattel. Second wave was in the 60s and 70s when, that was the women's liberation movement, where women finally had the vote, could enter into contract, but were still excluded from jobs and positions of authority, not by law, but by bias, just because people treat, and still do, treat women as less than. An idea goes around the table, a woman suggests an idea, there's 9 people at the table, one of them is a woman, and whatever she says is ignored until a man says the same thing. What got Laura's attention, and she has a wonderful history, you can Google Laura X or the LauraXinstitute.org, just LauraXinstitute.org. As a child, in St. Louis, she saw a painting in the Missouri History Museum of a slave auction, which actually took place. St. Louis is the home of Dred Scott, of the Dred Scott decision that led to the Civil War. And it was a painting of people, African people, being auctioned as property. And one of them was a little girl. And Laura saw this drawing of a little girl who was maybe 12 years old who was being sold. And it really hit her heart. And it affected her whole life. And later on in college, she learned that in 46 states of the United States, it was legal for a husband to rape his wife. Husbands were specifically exempted from the rape laws in 46 states. In 13 of those states, social companions were exempted from rape laws. So if a woman went out to dinner with a man, that was permission for him to rape her, and he was immune. And she took that on as her life mission. In 1969, it took her 25 years. She went state by state, getting with victims, lawyers, prosecutors, legislators, judges, essentially anyone that would listen. She would go onto these college campuses, show a movie, and then have a discussion with anybody that would show up, and then organize to change the law to remove the exemption that allowed social companions and husbands to rape their wives. Along the way, her friend Susan Brown Miller coined the phrase date rape, and they expanded it to spousal and date rape. And Joe Biden picked up what they were doing and used it to create national legislation, the Domestic Violence Act, I think is what it's called. And he's still working to end violence against women. And that was Laura's work. But she was also involved in 22 other social movements. She was working on Native American rights. She was working on civil rights during the civil rights movement and voter rights. She was working for disability rights. She was working for anti-Semitism. She was working on energy and stopping the dangers of nuclear energy. And on down a list of 22 separate social movements that she contributed to. Her papers are now preserved at the University of Houston. She kept records of all of this stuff. Her date rape and spousal rape campaigns are at the University of Illinois. Her work on femicide is now at Harvard. That's the history of women being killed just because they're women. And so that was second wave feminism. She was one of the icons. Third wave feminism is what we're seeing now, the Me Too movement and its time, where women of all kinds and men who care are standing up and saying, stop with the abuse already. You cannot use power to get sex with women. And it just doesn't work. And so we have a whole third wave happening. And one of my personal commitments is to seeing Laura and Gloria Steinem and a lot of other women who created second wave feminism recognized for the contribution that they made. Because most young women today don't know that husbands used to be able to rape their wives. They don't know that that was a campaign, that there was a national movement that changed the law. And by changing the law for women, we redefined what it is to be a man. They changed the world for men because now men don't have to be all macho, sauntering around like the caveman with his club, clubbing the woman over the head and dragging her by the hair as if that's somehow acceptable. And so we have a new era, we have a new opportunity for people to be able to declare who they are and not be harassed because of who they are. And of course that applies very broadly. But that's Laura X is just a total inspiration to me. She's 82 years old now. She's still quite lucid, still working every day, needs money like so many other worthwhile people. She dedicated everything she had and everything she could get to her life's work. And I just think that she's a credit to our world that people can do that. Somebody can live a life worth giving as an altruist whose life is dedicated to making the world a better place for everyone. That's the Laura X Institute. And, you know, as I drag with me these skills in raising money and helping people make their dreams come true, Laura's one of those creative dreamers that I would love to have her dream of being a respected elder come into being because she deserves to be recognized. And thank you for asking. It's, you know, I'm multifaceted in my concerns. My wife says I have way too many concerns and involvements, but oh well.
To that end, Paul, I have been frantically taking notes. I've got a stack of Post-it notes on my desk here for things that I've got to look up or research, or people like Laura X that I've got to research. So you've given me my homework as well. Normally, Paul, when I conclude an interview with a subject, I'll ask them to look into their crystal ball and imagine they're back on the show in a year or two or even 5 years. So for you, I guess, channel your dreams, if you will. In 5 years, when we cross paths and you're back on the program, what do you think we might be talking about?
Gosh.
In your utopian future on that timeline, what might we be talking about?
Well, certainly in the dream stream, I conceive of a world in which corrections has transformed its role in society. And that's a two-way street. We can't do it just as corrections community. The society has to recognize the sincerity and the dedication of people who work in corrections as people who are good-hearted and sincere, and that goes for law enforcement generally. I'm not a fan of the bad apple theory. There are some problems with the system that need to be addressed systemically. And so I'm envisioning that those issues will be addressed. Issues of power and control and equity and justice and kindness and compassion and resources that all could be available as part of, quote, criminal justice, that I envision having made significant progress in that regard. And then more importantly, I would really feel like we've accomplished something if we could begin to conceive of human beings as creative dreamers. That we're not people who are coming out of a story of the past, but we are people who are people because of our ability to dream up a better world. And to have things like lucid dreaming and Dreamosophy and Who Are You and Planting Justice and Insight Garden Program and Lara X and her traditions and social profit corrections and all the things we talked about today, to have them be accepted as normal, as part of elementary school curriculums and community organizations and the kinds of defining moments that make us who we are. The Hopi Nation in Arizona has a national purpose. Their national purpose is to protect both land and life and keep the earth in balance. Now, that's a lofty purpose, and the United States has a national purpose as well, but we have some maturing to do around freedom and unbridled freedom and being able to recognize the limits of freedom, and corrections represents that presence, that freedom works inside socially agreed upon limits. It's not ultimate. You don't get to make all the choices just yourself. American exceptionalism has run its course. We need to start taking responsibility as adults for creating a world in which we can be free within socially accepted limits. And I would feel a tremendous sense of progress in 5 years if that conversation were more normal, that people accepted that limits are good when they're agreed upon by the people who agree to stay within the limits. And they're necessary. Absolute freedom gives you Somalia. And we're better than that, to quote John Lewis.
Paul Sheldon, we will speak, I know, before February of 2028, but I'm going to circle this in my calendar, and we'll reflect back on this sort of time capsule, if we will, to see how many of those very worthwhile dreams, if you will, come to fruition.
And can I end with a song?
Do it, Paul. Let's end with a song.
I know it doesn't. It's not consistent with Talking Heads, but I'm just going to make a gift here. It's so easy to dream of the days gone by, so hard to think of the times to come, and the grace to accept every moment as a gift is a gift that is given to some. What will you do with your days but work and hope? Let your dreams bind your work to your play. What will you do with each moment of your life but love till you've loved it away? Love till you've loved it away.
Paul Sheldon, thank you so much. Until next time, my friend.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
A huge Criminologist podcast. Thank you to Paul Sheldon. I cannot wait to speak with you again, Paul. I have left links for both Dreamosophy and Planting Justice in the episode description of this program. Please check those out. My takeaway from these two chats with Paul has been that we need to embrace an infinite mindset and realize that this era's so-called correctional quackery may very well be the next generation's standard operating procedure. We need to strike that balance between program efficacy and open-mindedness to new approaches. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, implementation, program design, or of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter. You may give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us, ask them to subscribe to the show, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them. There's only us.
That you're not just your past, you're not just the stories that you've been given, but you have the opportunity to generate a life worth giving.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.